Welcome to Ruthless. So we're sorry that this is coming out a little later than it ordinarily does.
Yeah, I mean, I think events kind of unfolding warrant it. It's like we could put the podcast out, and an hour later, 100 different things happen. So we're actually trying to catch up and put this out at a reasonable time, and after we've had some time to think. I mean, about the million things that have happened over the past couple of days.
Yeah, we didn't want to give any hot takes. We wanted to think about everything that everybody's seeing and provide some honest analysis. I in retrospect, I'm really proud of the show that we did on Tuesday. I feel like if our country had more opportunities to have those kind of discussions that the Ruthless audience does, we probably never would have had anything happen like it happened yesterday in Washington, D.C.
Damn, that's a really good point. If you have not listened to episode 23, I think the Tuesday episode, I'm very proud of that episode. In hindsight, it's I feel like a lot of the problems we're facing right now is we've gotten to a point where folks don't even try to talk things over with each other. They don't try. It's like the forum for debate is completely gone at this point. It's just like both sides completely demagoguery. Yeah. So I'm really proud we did that.
So let's just start at the top. And we don't have a difference of opinion about what happened with the storming of the Capitol yesterday. I'm just going to say flat out, from my standpoint, is terrible. It's unhelpful. It was embarrassing to conservatives, to Republicans, to the country, to basically everything. I felt like it was a really serious moment. And I don't want to be melodramatic about it, because it's like, look, we've faced a lot of serious and critical issues over the years, and we've dealt with them accordingly. And I felt like we dealt with yesterday accordingly. But I also don't want to diminish the significance of a moment like that, because it means we're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Like Holmes said, we're on the same page here. I feel like you had a protest where you had tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people show up. You see these images of just a sea of people around the Capitol. And then you get this group of, I can't even number how many there were, hundreds, I don't know, a couple hundred, maybe 100, I don't know, who decide now's the time to start breaking windows, placing, there were explosive devices that were found. Break into this place and start just destroying shit. When we had spent all summer talking about the Biden riots and the need for law and order, and listen, law and order means law and order. You have now this large group of people who showed up at the Capitol with flags, thinking they were supporting the president when the president said everybody show up to the, DC, show up to the Capitol. And then the small group goes in there and ransacks the place. They need to be prosecuted to the letter of the law, the same way that we wanted everyone who was burning down cities to be prosecuted.
Yeah, no, there's no question. There's something, for me, there's an added element to it. And I know the audience is probably not going to love this, but it's my honest take, and I told you I'd give it to you. But I have a problem, Smug, in that the group that ultimately led their way into the Capitol, and let's not forget 4 people died yesterday. So this was not a show, right? This is something that actually took human lives. But they showed up to hear the president speak on the Mall. One of the most natural, cool, like amazing things you can do as a political activist is hear the leader of your party in the nation's capital on the National Mall.
Yeah. You've got the White House, you've got the Washington Monument. It's incredible.
It's an incredible experience. And unfortunately the program was, as we discussed on Tuesday, full of inaccuracies about what is happening in this country, and would leave a legitimately patriotic, good person
Mm-hmm.
To believe that their country is under siege.
I mean, 2020, everyone says it was like a hell year. Like, I want to know how many folks in that crowd have had their business shut down or have lost their job. And I mean, like, think of the way that, you look at the newspaper and then one day Andrew Cuomo says you have to wear a mask or you'll get, a massive fine. And then the next day there's a photo of him, maskless hanging out with people. And you hear about these politicians who are like, okay, everyone stay home, save lives. And then they're out on some vacation. There's a lot of frustration in America. There's a lot of anger in America. And, what really bugs me is you had President Trump give the speech that he called everyone to DC for. And he says, okay, now it's time we march to the Capitol and I'm coming with you. And he didn't. He got in his car and he went to the White House. And so then this group of people show up at the Capitol and they're like, now what? And then you get this like small, you get this group of crazies who decide, well, I guess it's time to fucking break the windows and jump in here.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's what happened. And I'll be honest, it didn't look that small to me. I mean, there was a group of concerted, their effort was to get in come hell or high water, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Bulldozed the Capitol Police, which we should talk about for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them broke windows. Some of them were on a window washer and went up to the second floor and broke in. I mean, it was like,
yeah, there were groups of people who wanted to cause mayhem. No matter what
they wanted to. And there's pictures of them. Right. And here's the other thing that I hear. I heard like Matt Gaetz, for example, say it was Antifa. This is how we got here. It's not fucking Antifa, right? In 2021, we have cameras. We have pictures. We have interviews. We watched all of this play out live. The guy with the horns, the guy that's standing in the middle of the United States Senate chamber with the horns on his head, that guy's not Antifa.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very well-known activist, right?
Yeah.
So let's not pretend this isn't something, because you know what? That's what the left does. The left spend the summer telling us that it was conservative groups that were infiltrating BLM rallies and burning them to the ground. That is not true.
Yeah.
Not true.
And that division is just, I mean, it's very obvious at this point. It's incredibly frustrating. You've gone on Twitter.
We got Duncan.
For a second?
Yeah.
Just to piggyback off of Holmes's point there. I mean, the media excused those Antifa riots this summer. And a lot of people have been pointing that out today on Twitter. I mean, the media also poisoned these people's minds with all their Russiagate nonsense.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I mean, it's crazy. And the media, and I think if you are a member of the media and you're listening to this, realize that those people who think the election was hacked think it because of Lynn Wood and Rudy Giuliani and all of that stuff, but they also think it because of everything you wrote in 2017 about how the election could be hacked.
Like, there were so many articles. I have a little bit of expertise when it comes to voting machines, at least in the city of New York, and the voting process. And while highly inefficient, it is highly secure. You've got the paper backups on top of the electronic ones, but you had these articles saying that Russia can hack into voting machines and just take over an election, and Putin can decide who's the president. So when you're telling people this, I mean, there's no internet connection to this voting machine in New York City. But when journalists are saying, oh, it'd be so easy to hack this machine and change votes, and oh my gosh, this must be how Trump was elected. That lays the groundwork.
Right.
And I think it leads to a larger point, which you would have to be totally blind not to be concerned about how different protests by different groups that become violent
Mm-hmm.
are viewed and characterized differently depending upon your partisanship.
Mm-hmm.
It
And
makes
that's what I think there needs to be such a, one thing I think Tom Cotton really did a great job of is just the, intellectual consistency. Like when he says that you got to call in troops, you got to get police to, restore law and order. You can't put up with this. He says that no matter which group.
That's such a good
Meanwhile,
point.
Yeah.
It's such a good point. He's the one that everybody spent all summer calling a racist
Mhm.
because he said you got to get the military involved. You got to make sure to secure these buildings in these cities. You got to make sure they don't storm capitals. You got to make sure that things are secure. And everybody called him a racist. So when he says the same thing yesterday,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's like, well, Tom Cotton, a moment of reasonability.
And then meanwhile, Vox, I'm sure a lot of you folks have seen this image that was going online. Vox had an article from earlier saying that riots are destructive, dangerous, and scary, but can lead to serious social reforms. And then meanwhile, same author after yesterday, every person who forced their way into the Capitol should be arrested. It's like, okay. How difficult is it to say that
They got it right the second time.
Both groups who riot should be arrested. It's commit crimes, get arrested. You'd think that's a simple enough idea.
We've spent a lot of time on this program pointing out
Duncan. Program.
Me.
The folks love program.
Yeah. We've spent a lot of time on the program discussing media hypocrisy on a range of topics. This one is obviously a big one.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot. There was a lot on post-election 2016 from these folks that is pretty hysterical now because it's a mirror image of a lot of the stuff that Trump and his campaign were saying after the election in 2020. But I just wanted to reiterate something from McConnell's speech that I really found interesting, where he said, don't imitate and escalate what you repudiate.
Yeah, it's a good line.
Something to that effect. And look, I think what the other side does is useful. Knowing the history of what the other side did is useful when we're talking about legislative strategy or precedents on Capitol Hill. It's not super helpful when we're talking about violence. This isn't fighting fire with fire. That's what I said on Twitter. This is playing with fire. What Trump did and Rudy did and Linwood did was just wrong.
Yeah.
Period.
There's no other way to characterize it. And look, I mean, this isn't easy to say about your own side. This conversation is a conversation not a single Democrat would have about them. And then that frustrates our people. They're like, why are we self-critiquing? They never do. Well, you know what? The honest answer is because we're better than them, because we want to be better than them. And that's why we are where we are. This is like the worst week ever. And it was we had this yesterday, which embarrassed everyone. Tuesday, we lost 2 Senate races to radical liberal Raphael Warnock and that sniveling credit card daddy using John Ossoff that lost the majority in the United States Senate. And all of it's connected. It's what you emphasize. We have emphasized for the last 9 weeks that this is all about a stolen election. That's not. And what it did is it had 2 candidates that were in Georgia that were hemmed in. Their only strategy, the only thing that they could execute in order to get to the finish line was to try to rebuild the Trump coalition from November as best as possible. They couldn't make their own case, right? Because if the best testing arguments, and I saw a lot of polling in these races, the best testing arguments were all about checks and balances, right? Meaning Democrats now control the White House, they control the House. Without these 2 senators, anything's possible. Like that, the prospect of that was testing through the roof. They could never use it. And the reason that they couldn't use it was because the president had convinced the base of the Republican Party in Georgia that he was still going to be president. So if you said Joe Biden is in the White House, you eliminate 30% of your base in an effort to get to 51 on the ballot. So it's a catch-22. I mean, this was at best a pathway to a 2-point win if you could replicate the Trump turnout from November, which of course nobody can, because, you know, look, you can say a lot of things about President Trump, but he turns out conservatives. Mm-hmm. He turns them out left and right. And there's no way that he wasn't able to do it in 2018 for other candidates. There was no way he was going to be able to do it in a special election or a runoff after he was on the ballot in 2020. So look, it's just disappointing. You know, it sucks. And I thought there was a chance that we could win this just because of how bad the Democratic candidates ultimately were. And we talked about it ad nauseum on this show, but we didn't get there. And it's our own damn fault. In my view, it's our own damn fault.
Well, I just got pinged this story. Simon & Schuster has canceled the publication of Senator Josh Hawley's upcoming book. The company said it cannot support Senator Hawley after his role has become a dangerous threat.
Yeah, I don't care for that. I don't care for that. I'm not a fan at all, and I said this on Tuesday. I'm not a fan at all of what Senator Hawley did in terms of his objections, and I know there's a difference of opinion everywhere on that. But I hate when corporate America
makes the decisions for
I hate it. I mean, that's what cancel culture is. Is that? Man, that sucks. That's
yeah.
Well, I mean, these are tough things, but I mean, you're looking around at the events yesterday and how they unfolded. A big question that everybody's having in Washington, D.C. is how people got in the Capitol in the first place. And, you know, having worked there, Smug, for, 10 plus years, I was always operating under the assumption that the guys that were standing out with the submachine guns in front of the building and the two people who were armed that were walking you through the mags, like they were there. So if you tried to get past them without going through security, you were going to get shot.
Yeah.
And that was always it was in the most crazy of times, the most amped up partisan of times that I was there. That gave me a measure of comfort because there was always a huge, remember that the height of the Tea Party was, and then the height of this massive Democratic sort of anti-war crowd in the mid 2000s, like that stuff gets ugly if it's allowed to. So I always took a measure of comfort in that. But I felt the same way yesterday that I felt about on 9/11 when somebody surmised that you can fly an airplane and ultimately did into the Pentagon. I just assumed if some airplane was flying into the Pentagon, it would get shot down.
Yeah.
And I just assumed when a mob rushes into the Capitol, they're going to get shot. And it didn't happen.
And I think, there's a couple things.
Let me just clarify before.
Yeah.
Not that I'm calling. I don't want that. I don't think that would be a good thing at all. But I was very surprised that the initial incursion in there wasn't met with more force.
And my feeling on this is I'm surprised they were not better prepared when there's going to be a demonstration. It was tough for those individual Capitol police officers. You'd see video, you'd have 50 people inside the building, rushing through the halls, and there's only like one cop there.
One guy.
It's like, whoa.
And, here's the thing. Like I worked for McConnell. We had a security detail, large security detail the entire time I was working there. So I got to know these guys really well, and they're genuine to this day, very, very good friends. These are the best people you will ever meet. I mean, they are so solid. They do an enormous amount of really dangerous work, and they just do it without even blinking an eye. So putting them in that situation that you just described, Smug, where you're watching on TV as one guy is getting backed down by like 500 people walking up the stairs, horrified me.
Yeah.
Horrified me. And, I understand that they've now, I don't know if the sergeant at arms has resigned or if he's going to resign or how they're going to do it. But like, clearly this is going to change.
Yeah.
It has to, right?
I mean, it's like the same way of how, when there were those instances of loony folks jumping the fence at the White House. I mean, now that the whole security situation there is completely changed.
They have to, because eventually you're going to get a left-wing group,
Mm-hmm.
an Antifa-like group that sees what happened yesterday and decides that the best way to combat, whether it's legislation or, some nominee or something, is to physically disrupt the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to charge it. And I just hope that we've figured out a different way to protect the Capitol, because
I think that brings up a great point. Is so you see, it's almost like there's this continuing ratcheting up from all sides. Where during Kavanaugh, you saw these images of Senate offices getting occupied.
Yeah.
And even on the left, whenever there's a protest, it's like it started with Occupy Wall Street. It's like Occupy fill in the blank, and the idea is like if we can just get enough bodies there, we can shut it down, we can get our way. And there are probably folks in that crowd yesterday who saw and were like, well, they shut down, they occupied to try to shut down Kavanaugh. We should just occupy the Capitol, not realizing Senate offices and the Capitol are two different things. But it has to change. There has to be that security measure. So no group thinks, okay, well, if we just get enough bodies at a place, we can have our way. We can stop the constitutional process of anything being done if we don't like it, because we'll show up in force. That's essentially the end of democracy.
It's like even more than the Kavanaugh stuff, though. I mean, there was Maxine Waters. Remember Maxine Waters saying, get in their faces where these people are, whether they're pumping gas or they're getting dinner with their family.
Yeah.
Basically verbally accost, people who work in the Trump administration. Kamala Harris bailing out the rioters and the looters with that Minnesota bail fund.
Yep. Which, by the way, she's never been held accountable for.
Never.
How the hell is it possible that she literally put together a fundraising for a bail fund that like arsonists basically benefited from?
Right.
Well, they let out people who had were in there for like sexual assault, attempted murder, and those folks got out by that bail fund. Never held accountable for it.
I don't even think she's been asked. Has anybody ever asked her?
No one's asked.
And it's like the other thing is, like, because I guess I see what some people have been tweeting all day, which is like, if you're one of those people that was on the mall yesterday and you've been locked in your home for the better part of a year and you see all of those things happen, you think, this is the way to get our way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like show up, destroy stuff. But that doesn't excuse it, right? Like that doesn't make it right.
No, it doesn't make it right. But I even think it's a level deeper. And this is where I put some culpability on the president and on Rudy Giuliani and the liberal of the world, is that the vast majority of people in that crowd, as Smug pointed out, genuinely believe that their country is not functioning as a democracy. Yeah. They genuinely believe that the vote was stolen, because he continues to say it. And in fact, in my view, completely inappropriately continued to say it into the evening as this stuff was still going on.
I mean, that's the thing, is like after the mayhem, Linwood says like, it's time for Pence to go for a firing squad. Like this is the kind of like poisonous garbage that leads to, if people believe there is this global conspiracy that Vice President Pence is a part of, and he has to face a firing squad. There were explosive devices that were found. Like there was a bomb found at the RNC. There was a bomb found near the Capitol.
People have been radicalized, right? But I guess my larger point is, we already know the corruption of Democrats. We already know the media's absolute unwillingness to acknowledge truth and, in fact, wage basically a culture campaign against our point of view. We know those two things, right? So there is, at this particular moment in time, this huge opening for people to exploit well-intentioned people to things like we saw yesterday. You know, I imagine every single person who's listening to this podcast has dealt with really serious, very smart people in their world at wit's end about why in the world are we allowing a stolen election to go forward.
Yeah.
Right. I guarantee you, I have encountered in the last 8 weeks some of the smartest people I know, some of the most successful people I know, saying like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, how could you let this happen?
And it's incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating. They're getting, you know, like you'll have Lynn Wood and Rudy Giuliani saying this is a stolen election. We have to fight. We have to have a trial by combat, you know.
So I don't blame them. You know what I mean? Like if you know that you distrust 2/3 of the information flow before we start, right? And then you've got the president of the United States, who everybody was excited and voted for and has supported for the last year, saying this is what it is, right? You are not inclined, particularly in a moment of COVID where you've been thrown out of your job, you're stuck at home, things aren't going well. You're not inclined to just sort of blow him off. You'll take his word for it.
Well, we also remember, like, in a lot of these people's defense, obviously not the people who committed violence and stormed the Capitol, but people there who were protesting, it was a weird election. Not weird.
Yeah, totally.
Like, it's just a totally unprecedented election because of COVID. We had massive absentee and early vote and not as much election day. And there was obviously a huge disparity in the breakdown of partisan makeup of those different buckets of votes.
Yeah.
And they were counted at different times. And so if you're looking at the screen, you're like, man, my man, Donald Trump, you're winning by 6 points. Oh my gosh, now you're losing by 2 an hour later. How does this happen? Yeah, I understand that people were doubting that, but that's why we have a process post-election. And like I said on Tuesday's podcast, you know, and we were very critical of this entire theater, this denying the certification on Tuesday. If you haven't listened to it, I recommend you go back and listen to it. You know, but that's why you adjudicate this. And they did 60 times in a court of law, you know, and that process, those days and weeks that followed the election is supposed to be the time where people come to terms with all of the stuff. It was an unprecedented, weird, different type of election, but that's the time to figure it out. It's not to let Lynn Wood run around for weeks, making up conspiracy theories, and then getting people to storm the Capitol.
That's right.
I mean, and this might just be my personal opinion, but sometimes I honestly feel like this election was lost in like the summer when you had these governors just willy-nilly writing these rules of how they're going to have their elections. That like, okay, we can send ballots to anybody. They can arrive so-and-so day, you know, days after the election even happens, they're going to be counted. So,
right.
We said that too.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you know what responsible people do at that point, what attorneys do is they engage with secretaries of state and governors as they're putting this stuff together and say, here are my red lines, right? If you cross this red line, if you by virtue of your own decision-making decide that it's important to mail ballots to everybody on our registration list, regardless of whether they've requested one or not, regardless of
if their address has been updated or who lives there now,
I'm going to sue the shit out of you and I'm going to raise holy hell.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to have people who know what they're talking about. Yeah. Who know what they're doing. Right.
And the president was just surrounded by so many lawyers who had no goddamn idea what they were doing or what fights to fight.
I mean, quite obviously, you know, Duncan pointed that out on Tuesday. I mean, this is at some point, it is about accountability. It's not always about what everybody else is doing to you. You know, you got to figure out how to do things to them. What's your advantage? Is your advantage that you have like 4 precincts in this county that ultimately have more Republicans, and that's where you want the early vote stations to be? Well, that's a pretty fucking good strategic move. Pull your head out of your ass and fucking implement it.
Yeah.
That's what you do to win. And that's what I mean, here's the thing that drives me so nuts about modern quote unquote conservatism, which isn't conservatism at all. It is grievance fucking politics. It is this idea that nothing good can ever happen to you. Only bad can be done to you, right? Get out of that. Pull your head out of your asses. That's not the way it works. If you have a way to advantage yourself, do it. Make yourself smarter. Make yourself better. Get a little bit more educated on all of the things that matter in your life. It doesn't matter if you're in politics or not. It's not about what everybody else is doing to you. It's about what you're doing for yourself and your family and everything you care about. And that piece of it, I mean, that's why I love this program. We don't deal with that shit. It's not about what people do to us.
And the result of, like, it's honestly incredibly worrying what the fallout is going to be, what the ramifications are going to be of the way Georgia went. I mean, we're gonna have Kamala with the 51st vote. That should be very worrying to folks. I mean, it wasn't, it was like not very long until election night where you had these like Dem operatives and thinkers saying it's time to pack the courts. And their side is ready. They knew their game plan. They wanted to get all their, voting rules of send ballots to everybody, don't check ID, because they had their eyes on the prize.
If on Monday and Tuesday night, if you were to tune in to MSNBC and CNN, it was all Georgia all the time, one Democrat operative after another. It was nothing but Dem propaganda, whatever. You tuned into Fox, and it was Josh Hawley talking about Wednesday. You looked at the energy online with conservatives. It was about the 6th and the protest in DC. One of the organizers of the protest organized many thousand people from Georgia. Did they vote? I don't know. I mean, maybe they did. They voted early. There was a good early vote program. So, I mean, maybe they all did. But the emphasis, if you would have brought 100,000 people to Georgia to go knock on doors, we would have won 2 elections. We would have won 2 elections. You'd have a majority. You'd have the sanctity of life. You wouldn't have to worry about the Second Amendment. You wouldn't have to worry about all the things that are now immediately a problem. And it's that grievance politics, Smug. And I know I get fired up about it, but it makes me so mad because this is stop being a victim. This is what the left does. This is what the left has made themselves experts at. Is that if only the right went, if only conservatives just gave it, we could be so great. But they can't, as long as they're around, we can't be there. And that can't be our view. We're self-starters, man. We make this happen. And you know what? When something happens to us, we reach out and we help our neighbor and we get to the point where we can all get back in the same plane. Like that's the way conservatives operate. That's the way we need to operate as a party going forward. Like this is going to take a lot of work to get away and get into a different place than we're at today.
That's my hope, is because right now the left is hoping for and stoking nothing more than being like, oh, please, we need to start a civil war on the right. We need to get these folks at each other's throats.
They're so excited.
Each other. I mean, you see them just pushing it nonstop. Like you had the Lincoln Project telling people in Georgia, they were running ads telling people in Georgia not to vote. They really want to just like splinter and split conservatives. And, if moving forward, we took the opposite tack and we were like, okay, we realize who we're really up against. We realize who is attacking our way of life, our ideas. That's where we need to focus on instead of following through on them trying to create a circle firing squad. Imagine that outcome.
I know it. Well, look, we we promise, absolutely promise that next week we're going to get back to our groove, right? We're going to talk about, I've got, in fact, Smug, I haven't even told you this. The New Yorker is at it again.
Are they at it again?
They're trying to rehabilitate another sexual predator. And I've got I'm going to go line by line through this sucker like we did with the tube and stuff, because this thing is so good. I want to do that Monday, and we're going to get back into a groove where we're laughing again. But obviously everybody can realize why this is not a laughable week.
It was a good episode. Like you said earlier, I'm very proud of the Tuesday episode. I'm proud of this one too. And I remain incredibly grateful to all the folks out there listening. So be sure to tune in next week. We'll have more good stuff for you. But until then, minions, keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs. Stay ruthless. We'll see you next week.